One, two, three, four.
Hello, you're listening to the Skylight Books podcast series. We are a general interest independent bookstore located in the Los Feliz neighborhood of Los Angeles, California. This year, because of the coronavirus pandemic, we've had to close our store and cancel in-person events. But Skylight is your neighborhood bookstore, and we are finding ways to create community even while we're far apart. In the coming weeks, we'll be putting out lots of new audio content to help you discover new books, connect with authors, and check in with your favorite booksellers. To learn more about how you can help keep Skylight alive, please visit our website at skylightbooks.com or check out our social media accounts on Twitter and Instagram. You can subscribe to the podcast on Podbean, iTunes, and Spotify. Thank you for listening and enjoy.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Skylit. This is the Skylight Books podcast series where we talk to authors from near and far from the safety and comfort of their homes. Here we are in quarantine times. I'm so excited today to have Mary Ann Cherry here to talk about her new book, Morris Kite. I'm going to read a quick biography of Mary Ann, and then she's going to introduce the book with a short reading. All right. So, Mary Ann Cherry is a Los Angeles-based writer with a diverse background in network and syndicated television and independent documentary films. Cherry has worked with nonprofit organizations, most recently created the Historical Archive for AIDS Healthcare Foundation. She enjoys a second career as an in-demand specialized yoga therapist. Her new book is Morris Kite, Humanist, Liberationist, Fantabulist, A Story of Gay Rights and Gay Wrongs. Welcome, Mary Ann.
Hi, Maddie. It's nice to be here.
Thanks for being here.
Yes. I'm going to introduce Morris Kite to your readers. Well, just to tell you a little bit, he came to Los Angeles in the late 50s from Albuquerque, where he lived, but he grew up from Texas. He never lost his Texas roots, and that held him in good stead. And when he came to Los Angeles in the late 60s, he noticed there was he knew already that there was a need for social services for gay men, for homosexuals. We're an incredibly marginalized group. So he started putting his phone number out and his address, and he created a social services business underground that provided bail fund for men when they were arrested. And then eventually he got doctors to start treating people for STDs in the back room of his house. They called it the clap shack, because in those days, if you had one STD, you were automatically reported to the Board of Health. And then all your friends were notified. It was in the newspaper. It was a public shaming, and you very often lost your job. So there were even heterosexuals coming to him for treatment. And then he paved a way for the post-Stonewall gay revolution. If I could just read a little bit from the introduction, might give you a little bit better idea of what's in the book. Kite, the grand panjandrum of gay liberation, was indeed a complicated character. In some circles, he was known as an egotist. Meanwhile, right down the street is another group of people who would describe him as a Gandhi-like godfather. Some people I spoke with about him simply needed to vent. Others gushed. A few people refused to speak to me at all. His self-importance is legendary even without this biography. Yet some of his worst and most appalling qualities served a broader purpose and benefited many people, while at the same time serving to beef up the profile of Morris Kite. None of this was new information. As much as possible, I have left Morris's own words intact, including his affected articulation, Edwardian enunciation, and seemingly run-on sentences. His impeccable use of the English language and inflection in his speech is significant. There is not a trace of a small-town Texas drawl, until he chose to use it for emphasis. And then it was without a doubt an authentic poor dirt farm twang. His stories offer not only an amazing accounting of the time, his history is solid, but conjure up a complete picture of the young Morris, who showed an awareness of the world around him, while also providing a glimpse of how he viewed himself. Morris's perception of himself is always paramount. vacillating between shades of Oliver Twist and Quentin Crisp. What finally struck me was that Morris never dropped his guard. He never ever fully revealed himself, even when he was his most vulnerable, and he certainly never attempted an honest and humble assessment of himself. So that's from the introduction. And it's the only time in the book where I speak directly to the reader, where I'm involved. Other than that, it's pretty much an historical narrative. I utilize old-time chin wagging and combined with academic research to the best of my ability. The day before Morris passed away, he and I spoke on the phone. He was still working. He was on his deathbed, and he was still making phone calls, trying to facilitate things to happen. And we talked about this book, and he told me about some files that he sent to a nascent archive back east in the mid-70s, I'm going to say, a gentleman named Foster Gunnarsson. And the files were lost as far as Morris was concerned. He never heard from Gunnarsson again. And I said, don't worry about it, Morris. You know, I'll figure it out. And and he gave me his blessing to tell his story. And a few years later, I was in New York Public Library in their special collections going through Morty Manford's papers. Now, Morty Manford is a forgotten name of the early liberation on the East Coast. And he was a cohort of Morris, and there's a lot of letters between them. The third time I was going through those files, I found a newsletter haphazardly, just tossed into one of the folders. And there was a little article, it was about a 1-inch article announcing that the Foster Gunnarsson papers had been acquired by the University of Connecticut, and it included Morris KIGHT papers. Bingo. So I go on up to Connecticut. They were so kind at the Thomas J. Dodd Research Center up there. And there was a treasure trove. There was just it unlocked a whole other safe as far as gay history goes. But my research really did begin in Albuquerque. And when I went to Albuquerque the first time to find out about Morris in the 50s, this was a different time in his life. He was married, he had 2 children, and he was on a whole different trajectory. Probably would have run for governor of New Mexico at some point if things had worked out. When I got there, Albuquerque it's a large town or a small city. And I knew going through the library and some of their public records, it holds a piece of Morris KIGHT, that place. And even though he left shamed, he was run out of town, so to speak, it's still, his fingerprints are all over the place. And I knew right then that this was probably going to be a bigger story than I initially anticipated. And there was a lot of times where I had to sit back and analyze the new information that I was getting about Morris, about the movement, about the times in which he lived. And I'm glad I took my time. I think it pays off in the end.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like this was a project a long time in the making.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
So can we go back to the beginning? How did you learn about Morris KIGHT? How did you get interested in him?
I moved to Los Angeles in 1977. I'm a North Jersey girl. And I lived in Venice for the first 2 years, which really was that was just a campus. I always heard about this older gay guy who had a place downtown. He was doing all these underground services. And eventually I moved into Los Angeles, and at some point I needed a job, and I was working for a gentleman, John Ferry, who said, we're going to help out Morris KIGHT as well. And by that point, he was already well into his 70s, probably early 70s. And I would just do his missives for him, and we became friends, and we would have lunch sometimes, and I would drive him around, do his I loved it. I really enjoyed it. He was a bit of a pain. He could be. Nobody who knew him would deny that. But he was never acerbic. He was never harsh. He was Morris. That's who he was. And so I was fascinated about this guy. And I sensed that there was a story there, that there was a good story to be mined. And I'm glad I followed up on that.
So where did you begin when you wanted to tell Morris's story? What was like the most important thing you had to get down first?
I did two things. I had the blessings also of his youngest daughter, Carol. She was on board. And when I went to Albuquerque and I saw the wedding announcements and I just saw this whole other side of his life, I knew I had to talk to his former wife. Now, this is something that would not have happened if Morris was still alive. And she was willing. Stanley Beth was willing, and she wanted this story to be told. And the more I thought about it, it's an important aspect of one person living in the closet. There's a whole slew of other lives that are left in a shambles as a result of that. It is not about one person in the closet. It's about all the other relationships. So right before I went to Texas to meet with Stanley Beth, she had a stroke. And she was mentally capable, but physically, her speech was still very labored. So I went back, I spent a lot of time with her, just being with her. And even though I could not get the interview that I needed at that point, I promised her that I would come back. And she promised me that she would do her occupational therapy and she would work on her speech. So I went back maybe about 2 years later and it still wasn't there. I was getting the story, but I wasn't quite confident that I had it. And I had to go back a third time. And she had done her work and I was there and she was willing to tell me the story. It was heartbreaking. And there she is. She was 83 years old now at this point. And so I'm ripping open a wound from that happened to her in her 20s. And she was so generous about this because she really would like to see this not happen to anyone else. And when it taught me a personal lesson too about rectifying our differences, making peace with things that have happened in our lives. And she was 83 years old and she just shouted out in the nursing home, "Everybody in the fucking state knew but me." My heart broke for her. I just, and I walked away and I said, if I do nothing right ever again, I will tell this woman's story. And so I felt that was really important. And it was an important aspect of Morris's story to tell. And then we have to move on from there. Then he gets involved and he's more overtly active. He was always an activist, but when that marriage fell apart and he moved to Los Angeles, that was all he could do was activism.
So what did Los Angeles look like for a newly out gay man at that time?
It's for many people, they probably say it was a little intimidating and scary, but I don't think it scared Morris KIGHT. He was ready to take it on and he was ready to start to affect some change, but he also recognized that it wasn't the time to be talking about gay marriage or, to these bigger ideas, because as he would say to Harry Hay, we can't even walk down the streets holding hands and you're going to talk about gay marriage? It wasn't ready. He wasn't ready. So what Morris's mission in those early days was to empower individuals, and thereby he was going to build a community. And I think it worked, because one arrest, if you got one entrapment, it ruined your life. And there were young men who were very ambitious and they had things to offer, and they'd be derailed. And very often, Morris witnessed that very often they would then just subject themselves to a life of alcoholism. And it's not fruitful for us as a bigger society, and it's certainly not fruitful for a community.
Sorry, I've lost my train of thought.
That's okay. Do you want to talk about early activism? You want to talk about the early activism a little bit?
Yeah, let's talk about where he started.
He started. So he was always a pacifist. Morris's pacifism goes back to the 1930s, and he became a humanist. It's an organization which is really doesn't believe in an outside God. It's a God within, and we're responsible to our own consciousness, that type of thing. And it easily lends itself to pacifism and a nonviolent social resistance. And the war in Vietnam was just starting to percolate in the early 60s. Well, he was aware of it since the 50s that it was going to happen. And from that, he became active in the Peace Action Council. And then from that, he was still active in that. And then he co-founded an organization called the Dow Action Committee, which became the protest against the manufacturing of napalm, which was used in Vietnam against the Vietnamese civilians as well as our own soldiers. So they figured out it was really like attacking the military industrial complex. And he hit Dow where it hurt. They had a very successful boycott of Dow products. And they narrowed it down because there's a lot of Dow products, not just saran wrap. And they narrowed it down to like maybe a dozen products rather than trying to say don't buy any Dow products. They said they needed these, and it was effective. And they protested every single day, 7 days a week at the Dow Company in Torrance, and then also over on Wilshire Boulevard. They held fasts. Morris didn't eat for 10 days as he protested for one period of time. And this gave him something to do. He loved doing it. He loved protesting. You know how some of us go fishing and some people go shopping. Morris went protesting. That was his way to unwind and be with his buddies. You know, there was a real cohesion between the protesters, and gossip here and a little of that, and who's doing this. And but from that, he had built up a lot of clout within the media and within other young activists, and he had started to activate young gay men mostly and lesbians, and they started to become politically active. So when Stonewall happened in '69, it was the perfect time for an effective above ground gay movement. Prior to that, pretty much everything was underground, except for the Black Cat riot on New Year's of '67. I think it was New Year's '67 going into '68. There was the Black Cat riot, which is pretty famous now, which was bigger than Stonewall was in '69. But New York gets the credit for the beginning of the gay revolution. So be it. At least it happened. I want to read you just a little bit from. I'm going to read you something because. By the early, I'm going to say at least by '63, Morris picked up an FBI tail. They were very interested in him. They were very interested in the anti-war movement. Morris was pretty keen. He was pretty cool at picking out who the tail was and who if somebody had gotten arrested and then suddenly all their charges were dropped, Morris knew that they were probably feeding information, because there was it was pretty easy to figure out. But I want to read you this one little bit from during the Dow Action Committee. Regularly, Monday nights were the general meeting of the Dow Action Committee, followed by good cheap food at a nearby Chinese restaurant called the Bamboo Inn. Over egg rolls, steaming noodles, and wonton soup, the, quote, traditional soup of conspirators, as KIGHT liked to call it, he and his friends discussed and analyzed the world's suffering and argued principles of the modern Western world with each other, other customers, and the waiters. One night, when the meal was over and the dishes cleared, the fortune cookies were laid out on the table. One by one, KIGHT and his friends opened their cookies and each received the same fortune, quote, "The FBI is watching you," unquote, quote. They waited for the restaurant to close, and once alone, Mr. Liu, the owner, locked the doors and came to sit with them at the table. He told them in his strained immigrant English that agents had been asking after the DAC's business. Mr. Liu told them that what Chinese people had learned after centuries of dealing with a rigid government: good, steady customers are a treasure worthy of emperors. Mr. Liu, according to KIGHT, said that dealing with the Dow Action Committee was very painful. Every Tuesday, the FBI visited Mr. Liu and asked dozens of questions about who was with them and what they discussed and if they left any notes. In recalling the story in 2000, KIGHT said, "That's how the syndicate, the mafia, got control of this country's politics, because J. Edgar Hoover was so preoccupied with hating the labor movement, hating the feminist movement, hating the lesbian gay liberation movement, hating the anti-war movement, that he totally ignored the mafia, the syndicate. They got control of our politics, and they still control it because of his inattention. I carried that fortune cookie piece of paper in my wallet for 18 years until it finally turned to dust. It just wore out," end quote.
Wow.
So, yeah. So activism is a lot more than just showing up on the line. It's important to get our voices out there. My blessings are with the peaceful protesters on our streets today. And you can tell there was a lot of behind the scenes things happening.
Yes, I will say I was at the protest on Saturday here in West Hollywood, and even though there were thousands and thousands of people there, it felt like there were people throughout the crowd taking care of us and giving us instructions and showing us how to be safe. And I've never been to a protest like that. So it gives me a lot of hope that I think there are many more Morris kites out there now.
Yes, absolutely. I believe, the monitors on the protest lines were very important. Now, remember, when Morris was doing this, he used phone trees a lot, but there wasn't email, there wasn't texting, there wasn't, and we didn't even have, I don't even think there were voicemails at the time. So you would sometimes have to call back the same person 6, 7 times before you got them and say, tomorrow's protest has been changed. We're not meeting at Torrance, we're meeting on Wilshire. But they did it, somehow or other they did it. The Dow Action Committee, I want to say, was probably, if not the only, it was probably one of the best successful corporate boycotts in America. It was very effective. And I think boycott continues to be one of the best corporate boycott tools that we have. Rarely employed anymore because we want our Nikes. We want what we want when we want it. We've become very spoiled as a people.
What are some of the other tactics that Morris and his collaborators kind of worked with?
Well, I think I will say that the peace movement was one thing, and then when he parlayed all of that energy that he had built up, and he told all his buddies in the peace movement, "I'm going over to gay liberation now, and you can come with me or you can miss the boat." Not everyone in the peace movement was all like pro-gay. There were some real, we'll say, bigots there. But what he did in the gay liberation movement, which I think will forever, and maybe it's just the nature of being gay, but he made it fun. It was just, he was going to be a lot of fun because they were liberating themselves. And it were people who had been so oppressed for so long, and they barely heard the sound of their own voice. And then to finally come out into the streets and to hear themselves proclaim their own rights to dignity was a big move. And that they did it in fun ways, and they created a lot of positive attention for themselves. I think, and the only rule that Morris had in the GLF, as the Gay Liberation Front, and this is it's an important lesson for me personally, was we do not respond to criticism. And when you think about it, if they started responding to all the criticism that they got, which was all that they got, they would not have any control over their argument. They would have allowed their opponent to frame the argument, and they're constantly on the defense. Morris made it an offensive demonstration. It was an offensive movement, meaning that he stayed on the LA Times. Why won't you print this ad with the word gay in it? Why won't you cover this story in a more positive way? And he had everybody writing letters to TV shows. You portrayed a gay person in a negative light again. And it was a very effective and I think empowering movement, incredibly.
Um, so let's talk a little bit more about your research process and putting this book together. So you mentioned you found these great archives.
Yes, well, first was the Albuquerque. Now, I still had a lot of Morris's papers. The few days before Morris passed, he signed over his collection. He has a great art collection, which is at the One Institute at USC, which is a fantastic organization. And but there was still a lot of papers that I had and that somebody else had. So I had certain pieces, and his later work is really well documented everywhere, but I wanted to get some dirt under my fingernails in doing this. And as I said, I went to New York. I went through the Morty Manfred papers. Mr. Jonathan Ned Katz was very generous. There was a couple of things there that were very helpful. And then Connecticut, and then going up to San Francisco and going through the Harry Hay files. There were letters that I found in Morris's papers in Connecticut that answered letters that were found in Harry Hay's files in San Francisco, which then also connected to Jim Kepner letters at One. So there was a lot of triangulation that happened there. And I think putting together the letters that Harry wrote about Morris and putting them with the letters that Harry wrote to Morris, it's humorous. It's very funny. And you can see there's a dynamic that comes out of these grown men talking like junior high school girls, really, about each other. It was, so there was a lot of those, putting those letters together, which was, when you lose that one puzzle piece and you find it, it's really is a glorious day. So there was a lot of moments like that. Yeah.
Well, and it must have been interesting too, because you knew the real Morris in a specific period of his life, but then going through all of this research, you're seeing not only his own kind of recountings of his life, but also other people's recountings and analyses of his life. So you're getting a lot of different inputs there.
Exactly. As I say in the introduction, he never really did attempt a full analysis of himself. And it just wouldn't be in his nature. It would be very external. And and I also spoke with two family historians that pieced together his mother's story, which is really quite hair-raising. His mother and his relationship with his mother is another whole movie unto itself. And there was this, Morris always seemed to have a outside perspective of himself and the world, and yet he didn't really have the self-awareness about how that fit into, about how he really fit into a room. He was a man of action. We can just say that, and he was a man of results as well.
And he was the man who did not want to take criticism.
He did well. No, he never responded to criticism. I mean, the GLF, the young people in the GLF, they really couldn't get that until many, many years later in their lives. They realized, oh my God, that's all we would have been doing, is responding to the criticism. But Morris, like right to his last day, he would never respond to criticism. And I would sometimes say to him, hey, Morris, you hurt my feelings when you did this and did that. And he'd say, I will try to do better. And he'd move on. That's how he was. And I think there's some worthwhile comment to that. You're not ignoring the criticism. You're not going to respond to it right now. And I mean, I think that when you put yourself in certain positions, that's all you're going to get.
Yeah, I mean, and it sounds like his goal was in advancing this cause, single-mindedly. And that, if you're stopping to listen to this input and that input and that input, you're not going to make any progress. You're not going to get anywhere. So right. I know where he's coming from on that.
Correct. And they already knew what the criticism was. They already knew what kind of comments they were going to be hearing. So there was nothing to answer to, except that you'd just be showing anger. And the hardest part of this whole movement was to keep it nonviolent. Because for the most part, with the exception of the Stonewall Inn rebellion, The gay movement has been very nonviolent, and it's been very effective as a passive resistance. And I think it's impressive. And there's because it has been so successful. And when you look at the trajectory of where gay rights has come in 50 years, as opposed to how far or how little women's rights has come in a century. So there is something to be said for the effective leadership, not to criticize any of the early women's, any of the second wave feminists, because they were important people. But I think with with the Morris Kite at the helm, you're gonna have a certain amount of finesse with the media.
Yeah, it sounds like the media wing of his campaign was really super effective, and him being stationed in Los Angeles, getting to attack, depictions of gay people directly in television and film right as they're coming out. Like, that seems important to me, and it does seem like a lot of the progress that we see now is in depictions of LGBT people. We're seeing more and more kind of own voices stories here in the literature world. And I think that comes from this idea of you have to attack the depictions first. You have to get the images to change to reflect you before you can expect policies to change.
Correct, Maddie. You're absolutely right. It's inculcating the thinking in culture. And that may be one of the most difficult things to do. Of course, it's very easy to do on television. And when you have television on your side, you've got a powerful tool. But that wasn't going to happen right away. They had to, so he was out there, he was picketing. They had got a lot of people out on the streets to picket the film Cruisin' and a couple of other smaller TV shows. They would monitor the newscasts. Very rarely would you see anything positive about homosexuals. And they would often even like sort of glamorize the violence against homosexuals. Got another one type of thing. And that needs to change. That needed to change. And I think to a certain degree, we still need to be on that. We have to be aware of that.
Yeah, I agree. Can you talk a little bit about like how were activists at that time talking about liberation? What did liberation mean to them, and how maybe is that different from where we are today?
That's a very subtle question, because there is the liberation that Morris Kite envisioned, which was he definitely politicized the gay movement, and as one person says, to think of a group of people organizing around their sexual identity to achieve a political purpose is insane, but it did work. But even within those fractions, there were still splinters. Gay liberation means one thing to one person, and it's going to mean something else to the bigger umbrella movement. What I think it was more than just being able to get married, and it's more than there was, what we're witnessing now with race relations. We really haven't come that far at the end of the day. And Morris wanted to stop people because he knew that employment agencies used a code in the upper right-hand corner, 33, whatever that meant. It indicated, wherever that number came from, but it indicated that the applicant was clearly a homosexual. So maybe it was 33% of a person. We can never figure that out completely. So there's no more code. There's no more codes used to identify a gay person. I don't know why race relations hasn't improved as much as gay relations in the bigger picture of society. I think a lot of it has to do with class, has to do with earning power. If you just generally speaking, as a rule of thumb, most or many gay households are double income, no children. Now, we wouldn't say that of most heterosexual households or most African American households. So there's an advantage that may not be so obvious to the outside. I think a lot of it has to do with earning power. I really do. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, money talks in America for sure.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I don't want to wrap this up because I know there's so much to say about Morris, but I wonder if we could kind of talk a bit more about what is Morris's legacy today, who's kind of carrying on his work, and how can we kind of interpret what he did and apply it to what our struggle is now.
Well, I think there's great examples of lesbian and gay leadership in our world, in the society today. I mean, the first name that comes to mind is Sheila Kuehl on the County Board of Supervisors. She's a fine example, a replica of what gay leadership can do, and not just for gay people. It's no longer this isolationism, because there really was an argument that gay people wanted to be of their own, kind of go off, isolate. And then there was the argument, well, if you don't isolate, then you have to assimilate. I don't think either of those things have happened or is necessary. I think there's a whole new path that has been forged here. Michael Weinstein, the president of AIDS Healthcare Foundation. Morris was one of the original board members back in 1986 when they started, with a coffee can and a clipboard. That's what they started with, and now they're in almost 50 different countries. They're an effective social services agency. These are all examples of Morris's leadership, of how he shaped people. There's when you look around, we no longer have to look into the gay circles to find gay leaders. They're everywhere, and I think they're fine examples.
Yeah, I think there's a lot that we have today that we have to thank people like Morris for.
Yes,
for sure. Well, is there anything else you want to say about Morris? Any other stories, tidbits?
I think the tone that Morris set in the movement is something, because it was fun. Like I said, it was very colorful. The first gay pride parade, nobody knew what was going to happen. And the fact that it came out with all these different colors and all these different kinds of people was wonderful. It really was a great surprise. But Morris also set he was, because he was so pushy and he could take a lot of the limelight, he forced people to compete with him on his level. And I would like to think that it was a friendly competition, but really and sometimes it wasn't so friendly, but it gave young gay leaders, with people who he was sort of mentoring, the ability to have confidence in their message. And they don't look around waiting for somebody to tell them to go ahead and do that. Oh, that's okay, you can do that. They don't wait for permission. Morris KIGHT didn't wait for permission. And he was the best example for that type of thing. You have something you want to do, you go out there and you do it.
Very powerful words.
Yes.
I think we're all trying to live by that right now.
We are. You're absolutely right, Maddie. I just wish, safety and peace for all of us.
Yes, very much. Well, thank you so much, Marianne.
Thank you, Maddie. It was a pleasure. And thank you, Skylight Books. It's a happening place. Can't wait for you guys to open again and we can go and hang out.
Yeah, we'd like to have your event happen in person at some point soon.
I know, at some point. I hope so too. It's such a beautiful shop you have.
Oh, thank you. All right.
Yeah.
Well, Marianne Cherry, thank you for being here. Marianne's book is Morris KIGHT, Humanist, Liberationist, Fantabulist. It's out now. You can get it on our website, skylightbooks.com. We hope you'll check it out and educate yourself and get out there in the streets peacefully.
Peacefully.
Thank you for listening to the Skylight Books podcast series. Please don't forget to visit our website at skylightbooks.com and make sure to follow us on Twitter and Instagram. Also, don't forget to subscribe to this podcast for more author talks and bookseller conversations. You can find us on Podbean, iTunes, and Spotify. Stay safe and healthy, and we hope to see you back in our store soon.
I see